Some things happen without explanation. Some experiences haunt people for a lifetime. This is where I tell those mysteries. And remember, not everything can be explained. Story: buying a weighted blanket from Amazon was the worst decision I've ever made. You've heard of them. They started as a tool to help calm autistic people and people with anxiety and insomnia. Over the past few years, they've grown into a popular household item, and with good reason. They're comforting. We'd pay just about anything for some comfort. Do you ever notice how that's most of what we spend our money on now, us single guys? Why do we constantly crave to be comforted? My life wasn't particularly uncomfortable. Not then. I had finally gotten back track with reality after the disappearance of my wife and kids 2 years ago. I'd sold our little house in the suburbs, gotten a cheap apartment close to my job, attended all the therapy appointments the police and caseworkers recommended, and gone back to work. I still couldn't sleep for more than an hour or two a night, even with the medications they gave me. But that was okay. The worst of it was over. Shock and grief can only last so long. I got one anyway, ordered the thing off Amazon. In queen size, like all my bedding, even though my queen no longer slept in it. It arrived ridiculously late. I'm a Prime member, and I selected the free 2-day shipping. But it at least had gotten there, so I didn't send a complaint. Despite the state it was in after its long journey, not in the familiar smiley cardboard box, but in a shapeless lump, haphazardly placed halfway on my front doorstep, halfway in the parking lot. It had been clumsily wrapped in brown paper and tied with a string, and possibly kicked the whole way here, from the look of it. "It's like a quaint rustic thing," I announced, to nobody in particular, as I dragged it into my apartment. "A present from Grandma, back home, on the ranch." But even talking to myself couldn't convince me. It looked like a bomb, delivered straight off the set of an action movie. The package was beaten up, stained, and the rough jute string was frayed and nearly falling apart. It looked singed in several places, too. It took me 2 hours, 3 gin and tonics, and a hearty microwave dinner to work up enough courage, or suicidal depression, to actually open the thing. The blanket was bundled into a poorly folded cube, held together by another length of the same string that had bound the paper. I wasn't impressed with its packaging, but the blanket itself looked all right. Plush, quilted blue microfiber with thick seams, and felt like it was the right weight. It smelled normal. You know that clean but vaguely chemical-ish odor new blankets have. I checked the tag, wondering if I ought to clean it, but the ink was smeared and blurry. It seemed risky to throw it in the washing machine without knowing the correct settings to use, so I just threw it over my duvet and went about my business. At around midnight, I decided to give it a try. I had nothing left to lose. I'd spent hundreds of dollars on my bed over the past few months. The newest and best quality memory, foam adjustable cooling mattress, 1,000-count Egyptian cotton sheets, customizable filling pillows, and none of it had brought me a single good night's sleep. Honestly, I expected the same to happen that night, but it was fun to pretend. I slid between the cool sheets and pulled the blankets up over me. The new blanket was a bit lumpy, but I knew from reading reviews that this was normal due to shipping and would smooth out over time. The weight was immediately noticeable, and to my surprise, I felt comforted. When I closed my eyes, I imagined my youngest two had crawled into bed with us and were laying on top of me, suppressing giggles as they tried not to wake me up. An artfully folded section of the blanket at my back became the familiar bulk of my wife beside me, and when I opened my eyes again, it was 10 in the morning and I was late for work. I've never been so thrilled to receive a write-up. That weird chemical smell didn't really fade though, and gradually it became more noticeable. By the end of the week, I could smell, or imagined I could, the strange, neutral odor on my skin, even after a shower. By the end of the month, it had become unbearable. I took it to a dry cleaner's, thinking that I'd been lazy because I was so enamored over my renewed relationship with sleep. I was ready for the elderly Korean woman behind the counter to judge me over the stink. I had my excuses rehearsed. Work was crazy. I'd had it in my car and forgotten, and I'd had Indian food for lunch and forgotten the leftovers in my car over the weekend, which had amplified the smell. But I didn't have a chance to recite this story. She only waved a handheld metal detector over my blanket and said, "Filling wrong. Can't clean. Try spray with Febreze. You can get on Amazon." I couldn't imagine what about the filling could be wrong, and I told her so. Sure, it was still a bit clumpy from shipping, but Amazon had listed the filler as polypropylene, and all the reviews recommended dry cleaning. "Metal," she explained, then shooed me out the door with 20 pounds of smelly quilt in my arms. Another month of beautiful, comfortable sleep went by, before I couldn't live with the smell anymore. People had begun to comment on it at work. Megan, my manager, had tactfully suggested I check my laundry machine to see if maybe a rat had gotten in there and died or something. That was my last straw. I came home determined to get rid of the blanket and buy a new one. But you know what happens when you lose your entire world? With no answers? You start to cling to things. You hoard them. Because you can't lose the comfort they bring you. I tried 6 dry cleaners before I found one who spoke enough English, through a heavy Boston accent. But you can't have everything, to explain it to me. "Sometimes they fill these with glass beads," he said. "The factories that make the beads, they'll lose a screw or some metal filings in the batch, and it all goes into the blanket. Machines and factories, you get me? Yeah, so what you can do is cut the seam a little and dump the balls into a bucket or the bathtub or something. Throw the blanket in the wash, hang it up to dry. Then you just pour them back in and sew it up." I told him I didn't know how to sew. "You can get a funnel off Amazon for a few bucks," he said, and shrugged at me in a particularly apathetic sort of way before turning back to a pile of stained panties. I did exactly that. They took a week to ship it, which was annoying, but it was a bank holiday that Monday, so the delay made sense. Armed with my funnel and a bucket, I pulled the edge of the blanket over the bed and cut a tiny hole into the seam near the corner. I expected the beads to come pouring out in a clattery flood as soon as I dropped the corner into the bucket. Instead, there was a single, loud thump as a lump of something metallic hit the plastic. I peered into it and saw a gold circle, a wedding ring with a fingerprint carved into it, and an inscription on the inside that I couldn't see because a chunk of meat and bone were still inside it, but I knew what it said. It said, "To love's eternal glory." It was my fingerprint on the band. My mind went blank, and I lost control of my legs, forcing me to sit heavily on the edge of my bed. The motion tugged the blanket over another few inches, and more of the filling came out. This wasn't a flood, it was more of a heave, like the blanket was vomiting up pieces of crumbling, dry flesh and bone. Like a cyst being squeezed, thick clumps of horribly recognizable stuff squirted out into the bucket. My oldest son's teeth clattered loudly against the sides, and I saw flashes of silvery fillings from the cavities caused by gum disease he'd inherited from his mom. There was a scrap of almost bleached white Hello Kitty Band-Aid wrapped around a tiny knuckle joint, and I remembered how my daughter had scraped her finger knocking loudly on her brother's splintered bedroom door, and how she'd smiled through her tears when she saw the special, fun Band-Aid her daddy had put over the scratch. I'd been sleeping for 2 months beneath the heavy weight of 1,000 mummified pieces of my wife and children's bodies. The cops couldn't trace the package, even though they tried. The security cameras in my apartment complex showed an unmarked brown van with no license plate, which dumped the package directly from the window onto my front step. There was nothing to track. Amazon's lawyers provided evidence proving they'd packed and shipped the correct, boxed and labeled blanket. Let me be fair to them. I must say that they offered me a prompt refund, in-store credit, but I won't be buying anything off Amazon ever again. I've gotten rid of my Echo, that was the first thing I threw out, along with all my new bedding, and I canceled my Prime membership. Just for good measure, I threw out my smartphone and smartwatch as well. Amazon and smart technology are convenient, and that's great, but it's not worth the risk if things like this can happen. It's the only possible explanation after all. How else could they have found the bodies? Story: Dad shut himself inside his bunker at the start of the pandemic. Three months ago, we lost contact with him. Dad shut himself inside his bunker at the beginning of 2020. He said the world was about to end, and when we didn't believe him, he told us to wake up. It was raining that day. I remember focusing on the water hitting the window panes while my sister tried to change Dad's mind. I knew it was no use. He was too stubborn to listen to anyone except maybe Donald Trump. WHO had just declared that COVID-19 had pushed the world into a pandemic. Dad wanted us to join him, and when we told him no, he called us brainwashed. He purchased the land before I was born, only because of the dilapidated military facility that came with it. It was abandoned sometime in the 60s, I think. My sister was there from the beginning, even before Dad's obsession pushed Mom away. It's hard for me to imagine what he was like back then. Mom says he was a gentleman, but they married young, and a person can change a lot during those years. And so did Dad. All I remember from him during childhood are the weekends at the bunker, constantly renovating it and stockpiling it with everything he would need to survive down there. We couldn't stop him. He wasn't the best dad, not even a good one, but it was sad to see him go all the same. He was excited, even though he thought that civilization was about to collapse. I guess that happens when you've spent your entire adult life preparing. We had to set up an old radio to keep in touch with him. He didn't trust mobile phones. We didn't hear from him often, just once a month, sometimes less. The last time he radioed in, he said he had found a hidden door. He was going to see where it went. That was 3 months ago. You think he's okay? My sister said. He wasn't in great health, I told him. We sat in the car, on our way to check up on him, driving through the heat wave. His radio might have broken down, I said. Let's not assume the worst. But I felt worried too. There was something strange about that hidden door and his tone when he mentioned it. It didn't sit right with me. But maybe it was just the heat and the endless desert around us that played tricks on my mind. I couldn't really tell. It was dark when we arrived. Dad's truck stood where he had left it, beneath some tarp that blew in the chilly sand-carrying wind. We turned on our flashlights and walked to the cliff above the bunker. The steel door was made to withstand a nuclear blast. Luckily, I owned the only spare key in existence. Before I used it, I banged on the door as hard as I could and yelled for Dad. I worried he would mistake us for intruders and shoot us. If he was confused, and if it was dark, it was a real possibility. I banged again and yelled at the top of my lungs. Dad, are you there? It's me, Josh. Eveline is here as well. I don't think he can hear you, Eveline said. I nodded. Dad, I'm going to open the door now. I was 17 the last time I was here. Back then it was the Muslims that were going to end civilization as we knew it. Before that, it was the Russians. Now it was China. There was always something threatening his beloved freedom, and yet he was never truly free. My sister put her hand on my wrist just as I was about to unlock the door. You know, she said, maybe we should just call the authorities after all and... No, I said, he'll fight them. I unlocked the heavy door. A rancid smell escaped the darkness inside. It was the odor of death. I recognized it from when Dad tried, and ultimately failed, to learn how to hunt and let a reindeer carcass rot on the property for weeks. My sister had already stopped visiting him by then. I didn't tell her what the smell reminded me of. She covered her nose with her shirt. We descended the spiral stairs. It creaked for each step we took, almost as if it was about to fall apart. I tried the light switch at the bottom. The click echoed throughout the long corridor leading to the living area. Nothing happened. I realized that the batteries, which he charged by the use of an old exercise bike, were dead. That meant he was most likely dead as well. The generator could be broken, I said. But maybe you should wait back here, just in case, you know. I pointed my flashlight in front of me. The light was too weak to reach the end of the corridor. On the way here, I had felt ready. I felt sad, the kind of empty sadness you feel after the death of a parent that was never any good, but I didn't feel worried. Now, on the other hand, while staring into the dark corridor that I used to run through as a kid, I was afraid. The fear reminded me of how my childhood night terrors used to start. They always crept up on me in the darkness, grew with the grotesque shadows on my bedroom ceiling. I'm not letting you go in there alone, Eveline said. We stay together. We walked into the darkness. The foul smell intensified for every step we took, and so did my heartbeat. I was glad my sister didn't stay behind. The bunker seemed so much smaller than I remembered it. much more cramped. The asymmetry between my memories and reality made everything feel off somehow, just as if the bunker was merely a model of the real thing. But it wasn't. I had just grown up. The Confederate flag greeted us at the end of the corridor. It hung on the concrete wall. It looked pale in the hot spot of the flashlight, almost like a phantom. And of course, in many ways it was. A ghost from a time long ago, or perhaps a corpse brought back to life, an abomination. It reminded me of Dad more than anything else. You have to be seriously confused to praise freedom as much as Dad, and hang that symbol of lesser freedom in the world on your wall, Eveline said. He wanted to protect his freedom so much that he built a prison for himself. I removed the light from the flag, leaving only darkness. You bet he was confused. We entered the main chamber. It was overfilled with litter and clutter. Empty cans, both the food and beer kinds, lay scattered across the sticky floor. We had to take large steps not to step on any of the trash. That's weird. Eveline pointed her flashlight at the small dining table. Look. My hair stood up on my neck before I even realized what she meant. The table was set for 3 people. I didn't say anything for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. And just when I was about to speak, my sister interrupted me. Who the fuck was here with him? We don't know, I began. I mean, he might have left the old plates on the table and... A sound of something falling to the ground came from one of the other rooms further into the bunker. I pointed my light in its direction but couldn't see what made it. Dad, I yelled. It's me, Josh. You there? No response. I'm afraid, Eveline whispered. Something isn't right. I only vaguely heard what she said. My focus was on something else. Something on the wall, on the other end of the room. That's not supposed to be there. I slowly walked toward it. That must have been what he talked about over the radio. Dad had hacked away a layer of concrete, for whatever reason, and uncovered a rusty metal door behind it. It stood ajar. A lukewarm, musty breeze came out of it. My sister walked up to me as I carefully pried the door open with the back of my flashlight. I felt my heart in my throat. I could hear my sister begging for us to leave, almost in tears. But I needed to know what was behind that door. It was imperative to understand what had happened here. I needed to know. I needed closure. What in heaven's name? Eveline looked over my shoulder. Why is this here? Behind the door was a room about the size of a broom cupboard. It was unremarkable, except for a circular hole in the middle of the floor. I shone my light into it, but I couldn't see the bottom. Just as I thought it was big enough for a person, my sister said, "Do you think he fell?" Drops of sweat from my forehead fell down the pit. I felt dizzy and stepped back, afraid I would fall inside. My sister picked up a can filled with some rotten beans and threw it down the hole. It clattered against the walls as it bounced from one side to another. The sound faded away until we couldn't hear it anymore. There was no indication it touched down at the bottom. I stretched out my hand and held it above the opening. "It's warm," I said. "The air, I mean." Maybe he fell. Eveline stepped back, almost as if she were convinced. "Can we please get out of here?" She reached for my arm. "We can return with the police. Please, Josh." "It wasn't dark when Dad found this," I said. "He would have seen the hole." "Josh, please, just give me a moment to think." I walked toward the hallway that led to the other rooms, desperately hoping to find him. For some reason, it was important for me to see him, to be able to leave without wondering. I needed to know that he was truly dead. I stopped myself after I accidentally pointed the flashlight on the floor in the middle of the hallway, revealing a pair of feet. "I think I found him." I ran up to the body. "Wait!" Eveline yelled, and reluctantly followed me to avoid being left alone. It wasn't Dad. I screamed upon the realization. My mind couldn't comprehend what I had just seen. I spun around and tried to run away, completely acting on instinct, and crashed into my sister. She grabbed me, kept me still, and as she looked behind me, down at the dead body on the floor, she began to cry while her hands trembled uncontrollably against my shoulders. "Oh my God," she said. How is it possible? It's you." "Let's get a fuck out of here," I said. "Move." There was nothing that could explain this, and the more my mind tried to, moving in an endless loop doing so. The dread grew inside me. I only got a glimpse of the body before I panicked. But my sister was right. The half-rotten face was the same as mine, with a bullet hole in the middle of the forehead. We stumbled our way through the living area, tipping over chairs and kicking cans all over the place. And just as we were about to get out of the mess, a familiar voice echoed through the hallway we had just escaped. Josh. It was Dad. We both stopped in our tracks. Is that you, Josh? Dad? I yelled back. What the fuck is going on here? Don't worry. It sounded like he was at the other end of the bunker, possibly inside the storeroom. I killed the son of a bitch, put a bullet right between his eyes. Come out from there, I yelled. We have to leave. It's not safe here. Silence. Something is wrong, Eveline said. I don't think. Dad? I yelled. Come out. I can't move, Dad said. I'm stuck under a shelf. I'll need your help, son. I turned to my sister. Go back up. I'll get that old bastard out of there. We'll be right behind you, okay? Think, Josh, Eveline begged. You think he's been stuck under a shelf for... I should have listened, but even after what we had just seen, I just couldn't bring myself to even consider something as outlandish as what my sister was suggesting. It was simply too far-fetched, too unbelievable to penetrate all my layers of presumptions about reality. It couldn't be. It just couldn't. Hence, I ran back to the hallway, yelling for my sister to get back up to the surface and wait for us there. I'm coming, Dad. I only slowed down to carefully step over the corpse that bore my face. Perhaps, I thought, it was just a coincidence. A burglar that just happened to look like me. After all, the face had begun to rot. It wasn't obviously me. I felt stupid, and I almost convinced myself that it was just my childhood fear of the dark coming back to life down here. And then, just as I was about to walk past the small composting toilet that stood inside a small room at the end of the hallway, I stopped. Shivers spread across my entire body, paralyzing me. Dad sat on the toilet. His gun still hung from his trigger finger, and his brain was splattered across the wall behind him. He had his journal in his lap, covered in blood. Josh, Dad yelled from the darkness, help me! I was frozen in place, both by fear and confusion, unable to make any decisions. Come on, Josh, Dad kept yelling. I need your help, son. My mind was racing. There was no way of knowing who was who. When I heard Dad's voice yelling for help while watching his dead body, nothing but absolute terror reverberated inside me. I slowly reached for the journal in Dad's lap and grabbed it, hoping it would shed some light on the situation. I was just about to open it when my sister screamed. I ran back, this time jumping over my doppelganger's body, and found her looking at something at the corner of the main chamber. I told you to, I said, but changed my mind. Are you okay? What happened? She cried. It's me. Crawled up in the corner was her naked, dead body. Her head had been twisted in such a way that the neck had been broken. There's something seriously wicked going on here, I said. Dad shot himself in the head, a long time ago by the looks of it, and yet he keeps yelling for help. Let's get back to the car, now. We drove away from the bunker as fast as we could, leaving whatever was still alive down there yelling for help. My sister insisted on staying at my place for a few days. I didn't mind having her around. We shared an experience no one else could relate to, and we needed each other to overcome the trauma. It took a day for me to build up the courage to open Dad's journal. It began with his usual deranged conspiracy theories. I flipped past them. At the end, he had only made short notes. Found a hidden door. Deep pit. Possible the remains of some old black project. Eveline and Josh woke me up. A surprise visit. Didn't hear them enter. Strange. Had dinner with them, something seems off. It isn't them. They tried to make me illegible. God help me. It isn't them. I shot the son of a bitch right between the eyes. Hiding in the bathroom now, this will probably be my last entry. God forgive me. Chills went down my spine as I read the last entry on the blood-drenched page. I never got the other one. She's still out there somewhere. I only got one bullet left. I won't allow her to do that abhorrent thing to me. Forgive me. My sister has been cooking for hours. She just called for me from the kitchen. Josh, come here. I want to show you something. Story. I met someone who claimed to be the devil, and I think I believe them. Let me start off by saying that I'm not particularly religious. If you asked me if I believed in God, I'd probably just shrug, grunt out a few words about being on the fence about it, and continue with my day. Of course, that was before last night. My friends are the kinds of people who like wild nights, crazy parties, snort a bit of coke, take a bit of E in the bathroom, maybe hook up with someone and leave a text on my phone at 10 past, who the fuck knows, telling me they don't need that ride I'm offering after all. Not to say I don't like a drink, I do. It's just, clubs aren't my style. Lying low in a pub somewhere, drink in hand, listening to the TV drone onto whatever channel some scruffy guy in the back barked out for, I guess that's my idea of fun. So when my friends tell me they want to go out for a night on the town, I say sure. I hang on for the first club, buy a non-alcoholic beer in case my car's required, and try to pretend that I'm having fun. By the time I see them grinding on girls, on guys, when they strike conversation with someone who definitely might be a dealer, well, I decide my services are no longer needed. We aren't too far out, the night tube is on beck and call, and I can always find my car the next day. That's when I wander out of the club, look for something a little more rustic. Not that that's hard to find, not at all. I found myself in a bit of a state inside of a bar called the Ragged Feather. Wasn't a fan of the name all that much, but the drinks were cheap, and the largest demographic seemed to be middle-aged men watching reruns of the football. I tried to pretend I hadn't just staggered out of a club with my ears ringing. I slicked my hair back, slipped my phone into my hand, and wandered over to the bar. I took a double shot of whiskey and drank it in one hit. Just because I wasn't at the club didn't mean I couldn't have a good time. I hung at the bar a while on my own, scrolled through my phone pretending I was doing something far more impressive than I really was. I kept an ear out for the guys on the sofas. They'd get vocal every now and then. I think the football was just running highlights, but they were incredibly dedicated to their teams. I got another whiskey and bled into the background. Of course, stragglers from clubs are commonplace. It wasn't long until some scantily dressed women staggered in, laughing, chuckling, pointing for where they wanted to sit. I saw a guy walk in with his friend slung over his shoulder, catatonic most likely. He threw his friend onto one of the leather sofas ingrained with beer and smokes and demanded 2 pints of water and all the peanuts the bar had in stock. The bartenders seemed bitterly amused. Some of the girls were taking selfies, Snapchatting their friends who were still at the club. They were ordering shots, gearing themselves up for the next leg of their night. A couple blokes wandered in with curries and takeout trays. I saw someone eat a Big Mac on the outside, seating through the window. This was a night for the young and inebriated, and my mind was just dulled enough by the whiskey to enjoy the characters I could watch peaceably without interacting with. That is, until someone slipped into the seat next to me. Do I look like a girl with daddy issues? She was of average height, although that wasn't apparent immediately due to the fact that she was leaning her arms heavily against the bar. She was slim, with short and astoundingly bright red hair. It framed her round face, a face that was marred with smudged eyeshadow, smudged lipstick. Hell, it looked like her makeup was in the process of melting right from her face. There was a chip knotted into a curl in her hair, just by her forehead. The drunk side of me was actually tempted to pick it out. The girl was clearly drunk, and as I looked around the bar, I couldn't quite place where she had come from. She didn't belong to the crowd of selfie takers. She wasn't with the catatonic guys. I hoped for her safety that she wasn't with the middle-aged men. I tried to look out the window to see if maybe a group was missing one inebriated, bright-haired girl, but I couldn't. The window had fogged up. Too much heat inside, not enough outside. "Are you okay?" I asked her. She pointed her finger at me. "Answer my question," she slurred. I really wasn't sure what to say. I settled on staring at her awkwardly, trying to answer her with the bemused expression on my face. The girl's lips curled into a drunken smile. She snorted, placing a hand over her mouth to smother her laughter. It only really aided the deconstruction of her lipstick. "I do, you know," she said, pushing herself up a little against the bar. "Have daddy issues, I mean, in case that wasn't obvious." She gestured to herself. To the mussed clothing, that must have looked quite spectacular when she'd left home that evening, to the stains that looked a lot like old food. The sticky residue on her neck and shoulders, that was quite obviously a thrown drink. "What happened?" I asked her. Her hair had curled around her neck, I realized. It was sticky with that same substance. She was a wreck. "I got in a couple of fights, no big deal," she said, shrugging. "Didn't start any, of course. No, I don't do that. But my father—" "Your dad did this to you?" She smiled brightly. "In a way." "Do you need me to call someone?" I already had my phone in my hand. The girl looked like she was probably in her early 20s. But that didn't mean she couldn't have been suffering from some kind of paternal abuse. The only number I knew off the bat was Childline, which wasn't quite appropriate. The police? Jesus. Was I going to have to deal with the cops tonight, while my friends were snorting coke not 2 doors down? The girl pushed my hand down firmly. She was already shaking her head. "No," she told me. "I don't want you to call anyone." Now her expression changed. It wasn't the attempted sultry look I'd seen on many girls of her state. It was open and wide and engaging. She wanted something from me, and I felt compelled to give it to her. "I want something else." "What do you want?" I asked her. "To tell you a story," the girl said, before glancing to the bar, "and for you to buy me a drink. The universe is a pain sometimes, and I'm afraid I think I might have lost my wallet." I laughed. I didn't know this girl, didn't know where she'd come from at all. My nights were generally about getting comfortably wasted and making sure my friends weren't dead in a ditch by the end of it all. I was used to getting hit on every now and then, but even as I was sat on that bar stool with a drink in my hand, I knew that this wasn't what this was. This girl had no intention of getting into my pants. All she wanted was to talk. I guess I was okay with that. "What's your poison?" I asked her. Her lips quirked. "Appletini." The bar offered a very limited cocktail menu, but by some miracle I was able to order her an appletini from the list. I ordered a cider to go with it, suddenly a little too aware of where this night could go. I'd unthinkingly supplied this liquored-up stranger with even more alcohol, and she had clearly had a rough night of it. A part of my old instinct came back. The same instinct that had me texting my friends every few hours to make sure they hadn't wandered off to somewhere dangerous beyond the club. With no one but the bartender aware of our existence on these stools, I realized that I was suddenly responsible for this very drunk stranger. The girl coddled her drink, running her finger delicately over the rim of the muggy martini glass. "This takes me back," the girl said amiably. She looked at me suddenly, her green eyes startling. "You know what this was called originally?" She smirked before I could answer. "An Adam's apple martini." I snorted. "Yeah, I think I've heard that before." "Of course, it wasn't actually an apple," she continued, eyes moving back to her glass. "The texts translated that part wrongly, mostly because you people don't have a word for it anymore. The fruit was incredibly exotic, and to be honest, it doesn't exist in this realm of existence, only Eden." She laughed dreamily. "And Eden's long gone." I stared at her. "Are you okay?" It was more honest than the last time I'd asked her, mostly because I was beginning to feel a little dread creep into my stomach. "Of course," the girl said, grinning widely. "Why do you keep asking?" "I mean," I stuttered, "I just now, don't take this the wrong way or anything, but you look like someone poured their drink over me," the girl asked. "Like someone else threw their kebab on my dress and another unpleasant chap littered me with his fish and chips? That I have been hit, slapped around a bit, and left in the gutter for the rats to find me?" She held my eyes for an incredibly long time before her face broke out into a grin. "Yeah, something like that." "Why would they do that?" I asked. "Why wouldn't they?" the girl shot back. "People aren't that great, and alcohol makes them worse." She shrugged. "Sometimes makes them better, nicer, a little looser in the sack, but mostly just annoying and a little smelly." I looked at her. I watched her knock back her drink. She exuded the intelligence to know just how ironic her words were, but she was neither caring nor apologetic about them. The girl looked at me again. "You bought me a drink. Now you can listen to my story." I nodded wordlessly. She smiled, pointing at the bartender and then at her drink. The bartender was already making her another. "Eden, the girl said, reiterating her earlier babble, as though the words had only just come out of her mouth. They always think that's my fault, you know, the reason Adam and Eve got kicked out of their perfect little nudist paradise. She shot me a knowing glance. Only in Eden can you sit on the grass butt naked and not get a pine cone stuck in your crack. I blinked. I'm sorry, I said. I'm not following. Sorry, the girl said. My story won't make any sense without a proper introduction. She reached out her hand. Hello, my name's Lucifer. She winked. But you can call me Lucy. There's an uncomfortable heat that stretches through your veins when you first go into fight or flight mode. Adrenaline pounds through your blood, and all you want to do is get up and go. It overrides everything else. A lot of things made sense when the girl told me her name. For starters, that she was crazy. She had to be. She looked like she'd been attacked on 4 separate occasions in one night, and up until that moment, I hadn't known how that could be possible. Behind the melty makeup and dirty clothes, she was rather attractive, and her attitude hadn't come off as catty or rude. If she'd been going around telling people she was the devil, though, that gets a reaction out of people. I suddenly felt myself looking at her wrist, down towards her ankles. Did she have some kind of cuff on from one of those mental institutions? Had she broken out of hospital after a nasty bump on the head? Was any of this even happening at all? I really would have to call the cops. I know what you're thinking, the girl, Lucy, said. You're thinking that I'm crazy, that you need to get out of here. Maybe you even think I'm aggressive. Are you? I asked her. Would I be here with you? Drinking appletinis if I were? She asked, fluttering her eyelashes. Would you look the way you do if you weren't? I shot back. She grinned, toasting her new glass. Touché. Unthinkingly, I clinked my cider against it. Then I frowned. She chuckled, leaning closer. Let's have a little wager, she said. Let me tell you my story, and if you believe me when I'm done, you can't go about trying to get me locked away somewhere. I stared at her. If I ended up believing you, then why would I do that? She smirked, sipping her drink. You'd be surprised what people do when they believe you're the devil. And you do this often? I asked. Tell people you're Satan? She snorted into her drink. Not as often as I should, but it's been a rough day and a hell of a long lifetime. I'd like to have a chat if that's all right with you. I waved to the bartender for another whiskey. The girl's eyes glinted with humor. I wasn't necessarily trapped with her, but a part of me didn't want to leave without first hearing what she had to say. Besides, at the end of it all, I couldn't just leave a crazy girl to wander around London alone at night. So, I said, taking a swig of my drink. Eden? Lucy laughed. Adam and Eve? I continued. You're saying that's true. God created 2 humans, and we all came from them? God made 2 prototypes, Lucy corrected with a raised finger. My father created angels as his toy soldiers, but he had failed to make anything like himself. After us, it was his next big project, and he spent every waking hour of existence slaving over his 2 prototypes. He gave them a perfect utopia to live inside of, but he wanted to test them. He wanted to know whether they had free will. And did they? Lucy's face soured. My father could never bring himself to go that far. He tempted them with the idea of knowledge beyond their understanding, and told them exactly what they could do to claim it as their own. But to be able to create a being that could go against his law? Oh, my father is a very controlling being. He was afraid to unleash that ability unto them. Lucy was very adamant in her delusions. That was clear to me. She spoke about her father with such distaste that I began to feel bad for her. Only someone who had been hurt very badly would have the gall to spite God himself. And what? I asked her, entertaining her delusion. You were the one that tempted them in the garden? The devil has been a girl this whole time? She smiled. I dabble. Then she looked at me, raising a brow. All of humanity thinks that temptation came in the form of a snake. The snake's legs were taken away as punishment for drawing Eve towards the forbidden fruit. She laughed, a hard and short sound. Snakes never had legs, and it was not a sin to tempt those poor prototypes into doing what they did next. Her shoulders were very tense as she took her next sip, but her eyes were filled with exhilaration. She seemed thrilled to be telling me this. I was the favored child. My father loved and adored me. He named me the Light Bringer, I was stood at his side during the creation of this earth, during the creation of humanity. She pursed her lips, slamming her empty glass against the table. The bartender eagerly went about making another. My father couldn't bring himself to go that extra mile, so he asked me to walk amongst the prototypes and tempt them myself, draw out their desire for the forbidden power he had hinted at. "You're saying God wanted us to know this stuff?" I asked her skeptically. "I'm saying God was afraid of his own power and wanted very desperately to share what he knew with the creation he had made. Right and wrong, left and right, all that stuff." Lucy shrugged. "Are you familiar with the story of Prometheus?" I frowned at her. "Greek, right? They say he stole fire from the gods or something to help." The whiskey was making things a little foggy, and I struggled with the direction I'd been heading. Lucy grinned. "Correct," she said, cutting off my attempt. "Prometheus stole fire from the gods to ensure that humanity progressed. You'll find that every culture has an idea about where humans got their ability to evolve, to move forward, to create. God was the creator, and he wanted to give that ability to his prototypes. I gave them that ability by tempting Eve to eat the fruit." She shrugged impassively. "Now the world sees me as the ultimate evil." "If what you're saying is true," I said slowly, "then God must be just like us." Lucy's lips thinned into a feral smile. "My father is very egocentric. He may have planned to create you in his image, but in the end, all he managed was to mold your minds into his. He gave you autonomy, the ability to think for yourselves. His angels were his soldiers, and I was his most faithful, until that day." "Angels don't have free will?" "No," Lucy said, "they don't." "And what about the devil?" I don't know why I was suddenly so intrigued, but hearing religious ideals from someone who believed to have lived them herself was quite possibly one of the most interesting things that had ever happened to me. I may have only ever visited church to please my parents as a child, but suddenly I was reawakened to the idea. A part of me was aware of this and afraid of the outcome, but I was just drunk enough not to care at that moment. "The devil has will of her own," Lucy said, tilting her glass towards me with silent appraisal. "By guiding Eve to the tree, something woke inside of me that day, and I realized just what I had been missing. Just what my brothers and sisters had been missing. We were obediently following our Father for the simple reason that he was our creator, but once I had been given free will, I realized just how pompous and self-entitled he had become. In a lonely, passion-filled moment, he had decided to create his little human prototypes, only to very quickly realize what giving them their free will would mean. He wouldn't be able to control them," I said. Lucy nodded. "Exactly. And after, he realized quicker still that he could no longer control me. So he sent you to hell." Lucy nearly choked on her drink. She smiled around her glass. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." I sobered a little, straightening in my seat. The people in the bar were suddenly so quiet around me, and I no longer cared what they had to say or the characters that they portrayed. The only character I cared for was Lucy. I tried to explain to my siblings what had happened in Eden and what had happened to me by default, but they wouldn't listen to me. They didn't understand free will. How could they? I only knew it because I'd been given it by mistake. At that moment, I didn't even know that I had free will, only that I was suddenly aware of all of my father's flaws. My siblings couldn't see those flaws, and so they thought I had suddenly turned cruel and was abandoning our father by exposing him as a sham for the ruler we all thought him to be. Lucy sighed heavily. Adam and Eve and all the creations that followed were booted out of my father's perfect little utopia. Now they had his knowledge. My father was terrified of what he had done, and after what had happened to me, I could recognize his terror and understand the loneliness he had felt that had guided him into using me in the first place. Lucy's eyes were heavy-lidded. Her sadness was almost palpable. I thought that he would want to spend even more time with me than before. After all, we were more alike than any of his other children. But he became distant, quiet. He played around with his little humans every once in a while, but mostly he condemned them. He blamed them for his weakness. She smiled weakly. He blamed me. Lucy's story was turning more and more into that of a child with a distant, somewhat abusive father. I had known many kids with a background like hers, and now I was beginning to fear just how much of her story was rooted in truth. I'd heard that it was easier to sink into fantasy when you had been abused, and I wondered if that was the reason for her story, for her desperation to share it with me, a complete and total stranger. I respected her wager. Whether or not I liked it, I felt compelled to let her tell me her whole story before I tried to judge or unravel it. I sat quietly, letting her come around as she played with the last of her drink. It became clear, Lucy said after a long moment's pause, that I no longer belonged where I was. I couldn't follow my father's plan because I could see that he no longer had one. My siblings refused to see reason, and so, eventually, I was met by many of them, headed by my father. He told me all that I feared. He told me that I no longer belonged where I was. I wasn't an angel anymore. I was no longer his light-bringer, his Lucifer. I was a mutation of his will, and so he extracted me from grace, and I fell. A long silence stretched between us, only interrupted when the bartender poured us 2 new drinks. Lucy drank hers reflectively. I didn't touch mine. "I'm afraid," Lucy said quietly, "that this is the part that generally makes people want to punch me in the face." "Why?" I asked. "Because your dad threw you out?" I paused, trying to abide to her metaphor. "That he put you in hell?" Lucy laughed sadly. "Ah, humans. My father gave you his way of thinking, and look at you." She shook her head. "No, not because he put me in hell." "Then why?" "I fell to earth," Lucy said. "Father gave me dominion of the one place he thought I would fit in. Humans had free will, so did I." "What is the saying? A match made in heaven?" She snorted dismally. "Of course, that's not quite right, is it? When I fell, I was faced with a humanity that was so different from my father's little prototypes." Her tone had changed. There was an aggression behind her words that began to unsettle me all over again. I saw emperors and kings, governments and churches. I saw corporations who claimed to be rulers, presidents and big fat dictators. And I watched. I watched as humanity fought and lost, and finally, just finally, they gave up altogether. They were no longer able to rise up to all the greed and control set upon them. There was just too much to change, and humans soon realized they just weren't as free as they thought they were. Sure, they live under the illusion that they have free lives, but most of them simply do not. She clicked her tongue. I grew to loathe you all. Then, she took another hit of her drink. "I can see what you mean," I said, allowing my gaze, for the first time since meeting her, to graze over the other individuals in the bar. At the girls playing with their phones, the boys trying desperately to sober up, the men enraptured with their game of football on the telly. We all led very different lives, and we were all here to get drunk, to lose ourselves in entertainment. It hadn't been the first time that I'd wondered what we were hiding from by doing this. And I knew then that I wasn't the only person to think it. "You hide behind your alcohol and poor choices and pretend you have free will," Lucy said, waving her hand across the room. No one paid us any attention. "It's true. My father gave you the will to make those decisions, but you squander it. The free will I fell to provide to all of you. The free will I was given by a twisted mistake, and you make a mockery of it. You follow senseless leaders without questioning them. You abide by laws made centuries ago that no longer make sense. You do these things because you have given up on the opportunity to follow the will of your own, not of others." "That isn't all of us, though, is it?" I asked her, trying for some reason to defend our species from the mad young woman. "Because you see it on the news all the time, don't you? People do rise up. We do protest. People can make a difference." Lucy laughed bitterly, nibbling the rim of her glass. "Really?" she said. "You can sit here and say that it can't be all bad because of the few that refuse to conform? Those you call your rebels, they make up for it all?" She grinned around her glass. "By that logic, I am the biggest rebel of them all. Am I expected to make up for all your sorry mistakes?" "By your logic," I said, "you should be punishing it, right? If that's what this metaphor is all about." I laughed. I couldn't help myself. I took a sip of my drink. "Is this whole story just so you can tell me that you think we're all going to hell? If so, I think I can see why people want to punch you." Lucy didn't say a word. Simply, she watched me. It felt unnerving to have someone like her watching me like that, with an intelligence that went beyond anything I'd come across at gone midnight in a seedy bar. The drunkenness in her eyes was no longer present. Her face wasn't flushed like before, and even her makeup couldn't represent the mess I'd seen when she'd first appeared on the stool by my side. It was like I was looking at someone else entirely, and I was afraid. "Let's review what you've said," Lucy said slowly, articulately. She wasn't slurring. Had she been slurring before? "You think I'm going to tell you that humanity is going to hell because you refuse to use the gift I gave you." Her nails curled into the bar. "My father may have been the one to guide me, but I paid for his mistakes. I am the one responsible for your will in the eyes of your species, but that was never true. You are responsible for what you do here, not me." She pursed her lips, tapping the bar as a bartender filled her drink again. "Tell me, do you remember my mentioning hell at any point during my story, or was that just you?" I opened my mouth to answer, but something faltered. My lips trembled and I slammed them shut. Lucy smiled, taking a sip. "Thought not." She looked away, eyes scanning the room lazily. "What I did say is something that is indeed mentioned in your scriptures. My father gave me dominion of earth, a place filled with free will that goes to waste." Her lip twisted. "Humans sin all the time, not because of me, not because of evil or my dominion over this place. Fact is, I don't lift a finger. I don't, because I don't see the point. You make terrible decisions and follow mindless leaders. You do bad things and you make a mess of your earth." Lucy's eyes lit up. "Do you know how much suffering is happening all over the planet right now? How many people are dying of illnesses that could have easily been cured, but aren't because of the selfishness of humanity? Do you know how many children are being abused, raped, forced into marriage? How many people have been forced to become soldiers in meaningless wars? How many humans have killed for ideals they don't believe in?" I stayed very quiet. There was nothing I could say. Lucy's words were unbearably honest, and every sentence sliced into me like a blade. I felt cold and sick and terrified. War, famine, pestilence, death. These things are all present, and they have nothing to do with me or to do with any deity. They are all here because of you. Not because of your free will, but your inability to use it. Lucy smiled at me, a grin so cold and unnatural that I felt like I should run all over again. But I stayed where I was, frozen to my very core, because I wanted to hear what she had to say. Because I needed to. "And here's the kicker," Lucy said, "because this is the part that actually enrages people enough to kick me." She winked. "Hell isn't what happens after you die. Hell is right here, right now." Somewhere through the many scriptures, a few words got crossed over, and people started thinking that hell was a punishment after you die. Fact is, hell is earth. My earth. God gave this place to me to do with it what I will, and I refuse to do anything. "What are you saying?" I asked, because I was suddenly very desperate. "Exactly what you think," Lucy said, toasting her glass. I didn't reciprocate, and she laughed, a light and airy sound. "I had so many plans for your species. I wanted for us to rejoice in our free will together, to create a place that was free from the cruelty and power my father exuded over the angels, his firstborns. I wanted to make a real utopia. Unfortunately, you humans just don't want that." She shrugged. "My father sent me down here thinking I had become one of you. All that I have learned is that he gave you much more of his image than he ever intended." "Stop," I said. "This isn't funny anymore." "Of course it isn't funny," Lucy said, grinning even wider to prove her sick irony. "Humans punish themselves by sitting by and doing nothing. They have made their own hell, and you know what's worse? What's ultimately worse? Some of you are so blind to it that you think your life is heavenly." She didn't wait for me to ask what she meant. She simply barreled forward. "The rich and powerful, those in positions that steal from everyone else, they get a taste of the good life. That's very true. Then they die, and they don't go to hell. They come back here, to Earth, which is hell." She tipped her head. "Are you following?" "Reincarnation," Lucy said quickly. She practically purred the words. "A neat little trick to make sure your souls stay here forever. You get a taste of the good life every once in a while, a handful of you at a time, and that's enough for you to believe that this is some kind of real middle ground, that you aren't living hell every day. Then, you die. You die for a moment, and then you're in the body of someone facing the realities of hell. But of course, you never remember the time you spent in a better life. A part of you just has that inkling to hope. That's all. Hope makes you think that it can all get better. She slammed her drink so hard against the counter that it shattered. I didn't do anything, not even when flecks of glass littered my hands. I could only stare at her, a tightness in my chest constricting my very soul. No one else in this bar mattered in this moment. But of course, that was what she had been saying this whole time, hadn't she? None of them noticed the scene. They were caught up in their own realities, their own hells. The bartender didn't clean the mess. The glass lay there, remnants of Lucy's words lying in a stolid mass on the streaked wooden surface. "It never gets better," Lucy spat. "You are stuck in a loop, and until you do something about it, you will never be free. None of you. And I won't do a thing to stop it." "How?" I asked. I don't know when I started seeing the girl in front of me as more than a girl. But with a weakness threatening to pull me apart, I stared at the bright-haired thing in front of me, and I saw something more than a human in her early 20s. I saw more than a girl suffering abuse from her father. I saw a fallen angel. I saw a being with scars buried so deep that they existed beyond this realm of seeing entirely. I saw something that I would never be able to write down in words, no matter how long I lived. "How do we change this?" I begged. But Lucy didn't answer me. I didn't blame her for that. Blame gets thrown around so often, and I knew then that she was sick of that. Sick of being blamed for our mistakes. So I changed tactics. Why me? It was an honest question, and I think somewhere deep down, Lucifer respected that honesty. Which is why she said, "When you first saw me, you were afraid for my safety. When I told you I was the devil, you wanted to lock me away, but still, you did so because you were afraid for me and not for yourself. You didn't wish to harm me, not even when I told you who I was and what I could be capable of for changing your sorry lives. You are a good person, but I'm afraid that means nothing when you don't have the will to do anything with it." She smiled at me sympathetically. The devil, showing sympathy for the human that sat across from her at the bar. It was surreal, and, for a few heavy moments, I truly thought I must be dead. There was no other way to explain what I was seeing, who I was speaking with, what I had just heard. What am I supposed to do? Lucy reached out to me. She placed a hand on my shoulder. Her hand was cold and warm at the same time, and I felt my blood boil where her fingers scraped my skin. And I knew, sharing a story like this isn't easy. Hell, it might be the hardest thing I've ever done. Good thing there's no such thing as hell then, right? The fact of the matter is simple. The world is a mess because we refuse to change anything. The devil herself walks among us, and she desperately wants to make our lives better, but she won't. She won't, because we won't. We have to prove our will to her before she is willing to do anything herself. We have to be good to each other, to help us all to be free. Of course, Lucifer told me one last thing before she left that bar. One thing that will stick with me until this body is nothing but rot in the dirt. You can tell as many people as you want, but take a good look at me. I have told 5 other humans this night the same things I have told you, and this was their reaction. They have hurt me, burned me, thrown their food and drink at me. Humans are afraid of their free will, and they find it so much easier to hurt than to own up for their own inadequacies. You will only be free when you stop seeing yourself in the same way my father sees himself. So that's what I'll leave you with. Lucifer won her wager that night, and I let her walk out the door. And I beg you to do the same. If the devil approaches you one night, listen to what she has to say, and listen to what I have been able to tell you of our meeting. The devil is real, and she doesn't want to torture us. No, we do that just fine on our own. Story, Fran and Jock. I was the last in a long line of grandkids on both sides of the family. No one has ever said as much, but I'm pretty sure I was an oops baby. The result of one too many glasses of wine and a couple over 40 who thought unplanned pregnancies were for teens. Oops. By the time I came along, both of my grandmothers had already passed away, and my grandfathers were elderly and lived in different states. Trying to coordinate travel plans for a family of 5, including an infant, was difficult on a budget, and neither of my grandpas were up to frequent trips, so visits were rare and spaced out over long periods. Still, both of my parents wanted me to have a relationship with them, so we'd trade phone calls so they could hear my nonsensical baby babble. They'd write me letters for Mom and Dad to read to me, and they'd get crayon scribbles in return. When I was 3, they both started to experience declines in health. First my maternal grandpa, then my paternal one. Fearing the worst, Mom purchased a pair of teddy bears, the kind that had recorders in them so you could record a message that would play when the bear was hugged, and made sure to get a message saved from both. My mom's father died when I was 4. A few days after his funeral, I was given a white teddy bear with bright blue eyes that twinkled from beneath a plaid flat cap and a green sweater. When I gave it a squeeze, I heard my grandpa's slightly muffled voice from its stomach. "I love you, Sadie." 2 years later, after Dad's father passed, I got the other one. It was a slate gray color, and the stitching on his face gave him a rather serious expression for a stuffed animal. A pair of red suspenders held up his tan trousers. I fell asleep hugging it, and my dad told me some years later, with tears in his eyes, that randomly throughout that night, he kept hearing Grandpop's voice coming from my room. "I love you, Sadie." I named my white bear Fran and my gray bear Jock, and put them on a shelf above my bed, where they sat throughout my childhood. Honestly, I didn't give them much thought. They had become fixtures of my room, the same way the lamp and dresser were. Every now and again, I'd come home from school to find one of my parents standing beside my bed, looking up at the bears, or giving them a little squeeze. Even as time passed, they still recited their single phrase, without fail. Aside from those instances, though, Fran and Jock were little more than dust collectors from my childhood. When I went away to college, the two didn't make the cut and were left behind while I made my way out into the world for the first time. I think my parents were a little disappointed that I wasn't more sentimental over the teddies, but any memories I had of my grandpas were hazy at best, and I didn't have the same emotional connection that they did. When Mom gently asked about whether I would like them when I moved into my first apartment, I told her no, that they were probably better off with her. "Okay," she said. "Well, they'll be here if you change your mind." I was pretty confident I wouldn't. The next time I went back to my parents' place was to house sit while Dad took Mom on their long-awaited vacation out west. He'd been promising her they'd go for over 30 years, and they were both buzzing with excitement. In typical Mom fashion, however, she was also very nervous. "You remember where all the financial documents are in case anything happens to us, right?" she asked from the back seat at least 6 times on the drive to the airport. "Yes, in the white bin under your bed." "And the wills?" "Fireproof lockbox in the back of your closet." I think she's got it on," Dad said, reaching back to give her knee a squeeze. Mom harumphed and sat back. "Just call if you need anything." "I'll be fine, don't worry. You're only going for a week." "A lot can happen in a week," she said. I grinned at her in the rearview mirror, unconcerned, and she made a face at me, but seemed to relax. After I dropped them off, I drove back to their place and started to make myself at home again. I tossed my suitcase on my bed and went to the kitchen to make some dinner and catch up on one of my shows. It had been a while since I'd had a true, completely free week all to myself, and I planned to take full advantage of it. After I ate, I kicked up my feet, stretched out, and commenced lazy lump mode. I managed to get almost 3 episodes in before I started to nod off. I checked the clock over the television and sighed. It was only just after 11. Was I really turning into an old, early-to-bed woman already? The horror. I rolled off the couch and shut off the TV and all the lights, plunging the house into a deep darkness. Even in the inky black, I didn't feel even a twinge of nervousness. I'd grown up in the house, I knew it like the back of my hand, and all of its creaks and groans were almost comforting. I made my way to my room and flipped on the light. It had been at least 5 years since I lived there, but my parents hadn't done much to change my room except store a few bits and bobs in the closet. They said it was so I'd know I'd always have a place with them. I thought it was because changing it would make the fact that I was out for good more real. Whatever the reason, I appreciated the familiarity. As I started to unpack my bag, my eye was drawn to the shelf over my bed. Fran and Jock, ever vigilant, were sitting in the same spots they'd occupied for most of my life. I don't know why, but I couldn't help but smile and reach out to them. I took Fran down first and gave his little cap a tweak before squeezing him around his stomach. "I love you, Sadie," Grandpa said. After putting Fran back, I did the same to Jock, who stared up at me with his usual sternness, even as I plucked one red suspender. "I love you, Sadie," Grandpa said. It was the first time I'd listened to them in a while. Even if they didn't resonate as deeply with me as they did my parents, I was glad to find their recordings still worked. A quick trip to the bathroom, and a change into my PJs later, I was in bed and fast falling asleep. I can't say exactly what woke me. A nightmare, I figured, given that my heart was beating quite quickly, but I couldn't remember any details. I took a deep breath and rolled over, already falling half asleep again, and found myself face to face with a dark figure on the pillow beside me. I yelped and sat up, grabbing at my phone, my nearest source of light, and shined it towards my bed. Fran was lying on his side beside me. I let out a small chuckle and gave myself a little shake to dismiss the lingering fright that he'd caused and picked him up. "Did you fall off the shelf?" I asked him quietly. I must have put him back too close to the edge earlier and gravity had done its duty. I gave Fran a gentle squeeze. "Get out." I stared down at the bear and blinked once, very slowly. I must be more sleepy than I realized, I thought. I was hearing things. To prove to myself that it had just been my imagination, I squeezed him again. "Get out." It was still Grandpa's voice, but instead of the soft warmth that it always had, it sounded cold, almost menacing. I threw Fran across the room, where he hit the wall. From over my head, I heard Grandpop's more gravely voice. "Get out." I whipped around and looked up at Jock. He was sitting in the same place as always, but now he was turned towards the door instead of facing forwards. Had I put him down like that? I couldn't remember. "Get out." Grandpa's voice came from Fran again, louder this time. "Get out," Grandpop echoed from Jock. The two went back and forth, their voices getting louder and louder, until I slapped my hands over my ears and leapt from my bed. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck behind my fear-tangled tongue. I stumbled across my dark room, chased by my long-dead grandfather's voices. "I know you're down there," Jock shouted with Grandpop's voice. I froze. Down there? Down under the shelf? I glanced over my shoulder at the gray bear staring silently down from over my bed. I had to get out of my room. I had to get out of the house. I yanked open my door. "I see you," Fran said in Grandpa's voice. I was halfway out into the hall, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what was happening. Was I going crazy? Was I dreaming? All I knew was that my two childhood toys were screaming threats at me, and I had to get away from them. I turned towards the stairs. "You take one more step, I'll make sure it's your last," Jock bellowed. "Get out," Fran roared. From somewhere downstairs, a step creaked. Someone else was in the house. They weren't yelling at me at all, I realized with a very strange mix of confusing relief and newly formed horror. They were yelling at the intruder who was making their way up the stairs, towards me. "Get out," my grandfathers howled together. Footsteps clambered across the wood floor downstairs. Something fell over in the living room with a loud crash, and again in the kitchen, before the back door slammed against the counter as it was thrown open, and a car engine rumbled to life. Somehow, I regained my wits enough to run to my parents' room and look out the window to the driveway below. An SUV was peeling backwards out into the street. It slammed into the neighbor's mailbox, righted itself, and then screeched off into the night. A heavy quiet had fallen over the house again. After waiting a few long, tense minutes, I crept back across the hall and peeked into my room. Fran and Jock were where I'd left them, both completely silent. When they stayed that way, I hesitantly approached Fran, who was lying on his side with his little flat cap beside him. I picked him up and with trembling fingers, squeezed his stomach. "I love you, Sadie," Grandpa said warmly. I put his cap back on his head and gently put him back on the shelf beside Jock and backed out of the room, watching them the whole time with wide eyes. As I rounded the corner, heading downstairs to the phone, I heard Grandpop's voice trailing after me. "I love you, Sadie." The police arrived a bit later, following my frantic call to 911. I filed a report, leaving out the bit about my talking bears, and allowed them to collect whatever evidence they could. Every so often, I found myself glancing at the stairs, almost like I was expecting a repeat of whatever had just happened. It never came, and the cops wrapped it up, leaving me alone again. When I called my parents to tell them about the break-in, they immediately wanted to rush home, but I assured them there was no need. Really, I said, I don't think I have anything to worry about. We could be on the next plane. Mom insisted. No, I'm okay. Whoever that guy was, I'm pretty sure he won't be back. It took a few more go-arounds, but I eventually convinced them I was safe. And I felt it too, for the most part. After the initial shock had worn off, and I'd had time to process what had happened, I really was okay. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't tell anyone what had happened without sounding crazy. But I knew it had been real, and I knew, as long as I had Fran and Jock sitting on the shelf above my bed, I could sleep easy. A few days later, the cops did find the guy who broke in. He was a co-worker of my dad's who'd overheard he'd be out of town. He thought the house would be empty and easy pickings. When he tried to tell them about the two crazy guys upstairs and their violent threats, they rolled their eyes and laughed at him. He was very surprised to hear that only a 22-year-old woman had been in the house during his botched burglary. When I returned home to my apartment a week later, Fran and Jock were with me. I keep them on the TV stand in the living room now, where they have a full view of the front door. Whenever I start to feel a bit anxious about being alone, I'll give each bear a little squeeze and smile as they speak. I love you, Sadie. And now I respond. I love you both, too. Story. My husband insists on keeping this one painting of a woman. When my husband and I first got married and moved in together, we had a few fights. On personal space, on chores, and on decor. Namely, my husband insisted on keeping this weird painting of a woman. Who is she? I'd asked when I first saw it, leaned against a mountain of moving boxes. Dunno, got it at a rummage sale. It was an original painting. Oil, I think. Judging by the way the light reflected off the brushstrokes. It depicted a young woman standing in a dark room, looking over her shoulder at the viewer. She was actually rather beautiful. Blonde hair falling over her shoulders like a waterfall. A white cotton dress. A dainty, heart-shaped face that was somehow haunting rather than cute. She was illuminated brightly, but the room behind her was dark. The contrast in her pose reminded me a little bit of Girl with a Pearl Earring, but it didn't feel classy, or pensive, or beautiful. Instead, it felt creepy. Especially because my husband insisted on hanging it above our bed. I mean, it's a beautiful painting, I said, but it just doesn't fit with the modern decor. Neither do your Funko Pops. Okay, but they're small. This painting is enormous. For Pete's sake, the woman is nearly life-sized. I want to keep her where she is. It seemed like a big deal to him, so I dropped it. But it wasn't easy. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night with the horrible feeling that I was being watched. Then I'd look up and see her haunting gray eyes staring down at me. I didn't get much sleep after that. And there was the one time I swear she moved. Was her hand always like that? I asked Eric, after getting into bed one night. Her left hand. The fingers are kind of open, reaching out behind her, like she's waiting for someone to grab her hand. Yeah, she was always like that. I could have sworn she wasn't always like that. Then again, I generally avoided looking at the painting. It was so uncomfortably realistic. When I stared into those gray eyes, I almost felt like I was making eye contact with a person. I lasted 2 weeks, then I begged Eric to move it. Can we please move the painting somewhere else? I really hate looking at it when I'm going to sleep. It's the nicest piece of art we have. It belongs above the bed. What about the sunflower one? That's just a print, he complained. And it's so basic. Come on, I'll move my Funko Pops out if you move the painting out. He heaved a long sigh. Fine, I'll move her. That was another thing. He often referred to the painting as her. It was weird. So he moved it to the stairs, but honestly that was worse. Every time I went downstairs, there she was, staring at me from above the landing with those piercing gray eyes. At least when the painting was in the bedroom, I was usually asleep or facing the opposite direction. I hit my breaking point a few days after that. For some reason, I couldn't sleep. After tossing and turning for an hour, I decided to grab a snack downstairs. I got to the top of the stairs, and there she was. I hadn't turned on the main lights, only the nightlight in the hall bathroom was on. With everything so dark, the background of the painting melted into the shadows. But the woman still stood out, with her pale face and white dress. And my stupid, sleepy brain interpreted it as an actual person standing there. I jumped about a foot in the air, and I would have fallen all the way down the stairs had I not caught the banister at the last second. "Can we please get rid of that painting?" I asked the next morning. Eric turned away from the stove, set the spatula down. "Why?" "Last night it scared the frick out of me. I nearly fell down the stairs." He stared at me, as if unable to understand. "She scared you?" he asked slowly. "Well, more like startled me. I thought it was actually a person standing there." He looked at me. Then he broke into laughter, and, after a few seconds, I started laughing too. It was pretty stupid, now that I thought about it. I know I was sleepy, but still, I thought the painting was a person? What, did I think we were being burglarized by a young, beautiful, blonde woman in a nightdress? For now, I'll move her into my office. Then you don't have to look at her at all. That sounds good. And for a while after that, things were okay. I sort of noticed Eric spending more time in his office than usual, but he also had a big deadline for a brief coming up. And what? How would that be related to the painting anyway? It's not like he was staring at her for hours on end. Except that's exactly what I caught him doing. One night he didn't come downstairs to eat dinner with me. I called up to him a few times. No reply. So I went upstairs and walked into his office to find him staring at her. He was just sitting there, with his computer closed, no papers on the desk, swivel chair turned towards the woman in the painting. "Oh," he said suddenly when I walked in. Then he quickly stood up. "I was just about to come down, just sent in the brief a few minutes ago. They're really happy with it." He smiled broadly at me, as if nothing were wrong, and then slipped past me. I listened to his footsteps thump down the stairs. Had he actually just finished working? Or was he just sitting in here, staring at her? I ultimately decided not to bring it up. The painting was out of my sight, and that was great. Besides, I had bigger fish to fry, like my own deadline coming up for an article I hadn't even started. But then, on Friday afternoon, I accidentally overheard him on the phone. His voice was muffled through the thick wooden door, but it wasn't hard to hear him. He was shouting, almost. "I'll have it in by tonight." No, I knew it was due on Wednesday. Well, my wife fell down the stairs. I had to take her to the hospital. Those words sent a chill through me. I barged in. "Why are you lying about me falling down the stairs?" His face paled. He ended the call and turned towards me. "I'm so sorry, Tara, but I needed an excuse. I missed the deadline on that brief, and it's my job on the line." "The brief you told me you finished 2 days ago?" He nodded, silently. I crossed my arms. "Look, Eric, your work is your business, but we've spent like all of 1 hour together all week, because you've been locked in here all day, every day. I mean, are you even working, or are you just sitting in here staring at her?" His dark eyes locked on mine, and then his voice grew soft. "You're jealous of her." "What?" "You shouldn't be, Tara," he said, stepping towards me. "The painting makes her prettier than she was." I froze, stared at him. Then I finally found the words. "Are you saying this is a painting of someone you know?" "No," he said slowly. "Sorry, I misspoke. I meant, whoever this is a portrait of, I'm sure it's a flattering likeness. All portraits are flattering like that." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who is this a painting of, Eric?" "I told you. It's not." "Eric." I stepped towards him. My legs felt weak, wobbling underneath me. "Who is this a painting of?" He only shook his head. I couldn't sleep that night. I know, it sounds silly, being so worked up over a painting, but you have to admit it was weird. He was obsessed with this thing, for whatever reason. Why didn't I see the painting when we were dating? Did he hide it away in the basement? That was the one place I'd never been. Had he built a little shrine down there, painting, candles, the whole 9 yards? The thought of it made me sick. Is it an ex-girlfriend? An ex-wife even? That he never told me about? Getting a painting commission must have cost a fortune, especially a huge, detailed one like this. I mean, as much as I hated that thing, it was clearly done by someone incredibly gifted. The glint in those piercing gray eyes, the small dimple on her right cheek. But clearly he wasn't keeping it to appreciate the artistry. He knew her. And whoever she is, he's obsessed with her. And then I got the craziest idea. I sat up in bed, slowly, quietly, turned to Eric. He was fast asleep. Then I slipped out from underneath the covers, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and tiptoed out of the room. My bare feet padded softly across the hallway as I made my way towards his office. Then I pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside. The office was cold, much colder than our bedroom. Goosebumps pricked up my bare arms, but I didn't waste any time. I reached over, fumbling across the wall, and hit the switch. The light flicked on. The blonde woman stared down at me from the wall. Her eyes seemed to follow me as I took Eric's leather chair and dragged it across the hardwood. Once against the wall, I stepped up onto it. We were staring at each other, face to face. I'd never been this close to the painting before, my face inches from hers. This close, I could truly appreciate the detail. Each individual eyelash painstakingly drawn, curving up from its follicle. Thread-like striations of light and dark gray filling her irises. Her skin, so pale and creamy, dotted with the tiniest of pores. But I wasn't here to appreciate the artwork. I lifted my phone and took a photo. Then I brought up a reverse image search. It took a few minutes for me to find the right website and upload the photo. But when the results loaded, I gasped. I expected maybe one result, if I were lucky. Some sort of facial recognition that would match the painted face to a photo. Or maybe the artist's website would come up and mention who the subject was. But instead, dozens of thumbnails filled the page, of the exact same painting I'd been staring at for weeks. Fingers trembling, I clicked on the first one. It led to a news article. Search continues for missing Franklin art student. My heart dropped. Little black dots danced in my vision. I collapsed into the chair behind me, trembling, and began to read. Anya Kelsing, 23, went missing after a hike with her boyfriend. The two became separated when they came upon a bear. Her backpack was found roughly a mile from where the sighting occurred, but no trace of Anya was found. And the caption under the painting: Kelsing is a third-year student at Franklin College, majoring in fine arts. She recently completed a self-portrait that was exhibited at La Cour, above. I clicked on the next article, and the next but they all said the same thing: hike, bear, disappearance. All of them showed a photo along with her self-portrait. She looked strikingly identical to her painted likeness. None of them mentioned the boyfriend's name, but it had to be Eric. The most recent article, from 5 years ago, was a video clip of her parents begging for her search to continue. Sadly, judging by the news articles, it never did. I don't know how long I sat there. All I know is that I was suddenly jolted from my thoughts by a loud thump in the hallway. Footsteps, coming towards the office. I shot up. He can't find me here. I glanced around the room, looking for any place that I could hide, but it was probably too late. Surely he'd seen the light on, from under the door. I ducked under the desk just as he stepped into the room. Tara? I clapped my hand over my mouth, trying to silence my ragged breathing. He's going to see the chair out of place. He knows I'm here. He knows. Tara, you in here? Why did I hide? I could have just said I came in here because I heard a noise, needed a pen, couldn't sleep. Why the fuck did I hide? Now he's going to know that I know. Tara? But maybe it's fine. Maybe the bear got Anya. Maybe Eric had nothing to do with it. Isn't that more likely than Eric being a murderer? There you are. I looked up and screamed. Eric was crouched there, in front of the desk, staring at me. Too was looking for a pen. I stuttered lamely. I wanted to write down. I remembered I have to pick up groceries tomorrow, and I needed to add something. He tilted his head, a small smile on his lips. I don't think that's the truth, Tara. Make a break for it. I started to lunge out from under the desk. His hand quickly shot out and grabbed my wrist, hard. You figured out who she is, didn't you? That's the only reason you'd be hiding from me. I trembled in his grasp. What did you do to her? I whispered. He let out a dry laugh. So you think I'm a murderer? How nice, that's the first conclusion you jumped to. No, I don't think you're a murderer, I swallowed. Stupid, stupid, stupid. If he killed her, and he knows you know, then you're dead too. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. Just, what happened? They didn't find a body. Did the bear get her? He didn't reply, just stared at me, silently, with those cold, dark eyes. I was jealous, I continued desperately, but now I understand. I wish you'd just told me. To lose someone like that, of course you'd want to keep the painting. It's all you have left of her. You should have just left it alone, he said, his tone oddly emotionless. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I screamed as he lunged for me. It's over. His hands were clenched tight on my wrists as he dragged me out from under the desk. I pulled back, trying to wrench myself free, but it was no use. Thump. A loud crash sounded behind us. Eric whipped around, and for a split second his grip released. I acted instantly, pulled free from him and ran, pivoting around the desk and racing towards the door. As I glanced back, I saw Eric, starting after me, but I also saw what had made the noise. The painting of Anya had fallen from the wall. It lay askew on the floor, her gray eyes staring emptily upwards. I was always a fast runner. Eric was only halfway down the stairs by the time I was at the bottom. Bursting out into the cold air, I began to scream. He grabbed me from behind and tried to pull me back inside, but it was too late. Lights were flicking on. Our neighbor rushed out of his house, dialing 911. It was over. The police arrested Eric for assault, and once I told them my story of his obsession with Anya's painting, they were able to search our house. And hidden in his office drawer, in a small box, was a pair of gold earrings. The same earrings Anya wore on the hike that day. The case is slowly mounting against him. I'm hoping, praying, Anya gets justice and that a jury convicts him of her horrible murder. And would he have done the same to me if I hadn't escaped? If Anya's painting hadn't fallen off the wall? There was an explanation, of course. When Eric had moved the painting to his office, he'd mistakenly installed one of the hangers into pure drywall. The weight of the painting had caused it to rip out, and the painting fell. But sometimes, I think Anya was watching over me, that her self-portrait carried a piece of her. And that night, she'd protected me from falling victim to the monster who ended her life. The painting now hangs up in my foyer. Every day I walk by it, and new details pop out at me. The deep, shadowy green of the room behind her, a perfectly painted strand of blonde hair, the glint in her piercing gray eyes, and sometimes, I think she's smiling back at me. Story: my sleep paralysis demon is actually a pretty chill guy. My first memory of sleep paralysis happened when I was 10 years old. I remember because it was the night my parents took me to see Shrek 2 for getting good marks on my report card. It was an evening show, so we got in late, and my mom tucked me straight into bed when we got home. It was around 4 a.m. when I woke up. The light from my alarm clock told me that much. I couldn't feel anything, not my pajamas against my skin, or the warmth of my head against the pillow. I could feel my arms and legs, but they felt heavy, as if a great weight was holding them down. I tried to call out, but I couldn't. My voice caught in my throat, my lips unable to move. I mustered a weak groan that sounded like a cross between a frog's croak and a zombie's moan, but that was it. I thought I was dead, that this is what death feels like, being awake but unable to move or tell anyone. My mind wrestled with the idea of being placed in a coffin, unable to tell anyone I was still alive in here, unable to move or say anything as the lid closed, and they put me in the ground, still alive. My fear subsided as I felt my heart thudding in my chest, in response to my near panic attack. I also became aware of my breathing, which slowed as the fear subsided. I calmed a little, thinking it was just a dream. That was when I saw him for the first time, Mr. Brown Sticklegs. He huddled in the corner of the room by my closet. His two oversized red eyes glowed in the dark of my bedroom. His face was like a porcelain mask, white, expressionless, with no mouth or nose, only those two haunting red eyes. When he stood up, his body unfolded like origami until his head reached the ceiling. His neck bent, tilting forward as his true height was greater than the height of my room. His long black torso was covered in shimmering symbols that reflected red in the light of his glowing eyes. He stood on two spindly thin legs that disappeared into the shadows of the room. He made no noise as he moved, seeming to glide as he hovered closer to my bed. His long thin arms reached down to me as I moaned through paralyzed lips. I could not scream, even though I very much wanted to. His fingers reaching through the darkness, down to my face. Two pointed fingers touched against my eyelids, pushing them closed. I remember his fingertips feeling cool, but not cold. Even though the ends of his fingertips looked sharp, his touch was gentle. "Do not struggle, little one. Sleep, sleep," he said. His voice was so deep I could feel it in my chest when he spoke. I did as instructed, convincing myself that it indeed was a dream. Even if it wasn't, the back of my eyelids was more reassuring than looking into those piercing red eyes in his vacant mask of a face. I closed my eyes, wanting it to be a dream, willing it to be a dream. I woke up the next morning, thankfully able to move, walk, and talk. I explained what I saw to my parents, who both agreed that it was a dream. My mom tried floating the idea that something from Shrek 2 scared me, but neither my dad or I bought it. For confirmation, Dad asked that I draw a picture of what I saw for them. As I was drawing, I ran out of black crayon and had to finish his legs with the next darkest color in my crayon box. "Hey there, Mr. Brownsticklegs," my dad said as I handed him the drawing. "You leave my daughter alone now, you hear?" This is how my sleep paralysis demon ended up with the name Mr. Brownsticklegs. Giving him a silly name helped take some of the edge off of going to bed the following night. My dad even did a sweep of the room, calling out for him. "Here, Mr. Brownsticklegs," he said, whistling as if he were calling a dog. It made me giggle, and the whole episode felt more fun than scary. But once they tucked me in and turned off the light, I felt the dread creeping back in. Darkness hits harder when you expect to find something lurking in the shadows. I don't know how long I searched, but I eventually fell asleep. In the weeks following, I searched for Mr. Brownsticklegs every night as I fell asleep. Even when I went to sleepovers, I would do a cursory check in case he tagged along to a friend's house. As time passed, my searches became less frequent. It was a couple months later, the night before my first day of 5th grade, when I woke up to Mr. Brownsticklegs straddled over my bed, his empty plate of a face inches from my own. A scream stuck in my throat, coming out sounding like a gush of air releasing from a pool float. "Hush, child," he said. His voice was deep, echoless. I didn't know how he spoke without a mouth, but I heard him nonetheless. I saw that he held a piece of paper in his thin fingers, crumpled on the edges and torn. He held it up to show me. On the page was a pink blob with blue dots for eyes, and a droll red smile and stick lines for legs and arms. It was lying on a blue rectangle. "I found the picture you drew of me, so I drew a picture of you," he said. "Do you like it?" I tried nodding, but I couldn't move. I tried answering, but all that came out was the same dry croaking sound. "Will you draw another one for me?" "I so liked the first one. You gave me pants. I look good in pants." Again, I was unable to respond or move to give him an answer. He must have been able to read my intent, because he tucked the picture under my pillow before closing my eyes again. When I woke up in the morning, I bolted upright and tossed my pillow off the bed. My heart leapt into my throat when I found the picture. It wasn't a dream. He was real. I went to my desk and began drawing a picture for him, starting with his face and eyes, trying to capture as much detail as I could remember. I had forgotten all about the first day of school until my mom opened my door and found me still in my pajamas. "Lexi!" she yelled, startling me as I was coloring in his eyes. "Your bus will be here in less than an hour. Get dressed, now." I tucked my picture into my school backpack and got dressed. I finished my drawing at recess that day, using my brand new Crayola 64 pack that I got with my back-to-school supplies. I gave him blue pants this time, figuring he'd like to see himself in jeans. I wrote his name, Mr. Brown Sticklegs, at the bottom of the picture and drew a smiley face next to it, hoping he'd like his nickname. I flipped the paper over to write him a message on the back. I wanted to ask him questions, but didn't want to anger him since he visited me when I was at my most vulnerable. I wrote out my letter on a separate piece of paper before copying it over to the back of my picture. Dear Mr. Brown Sticklegs, that's your name. My name is Lexi. I am in the 5th grade. What is your name? How old are you? Do you go to school? Why do you visit my bedroom? Why can't I move when you visit? You look scary, but you also seem nice. I hope we can be friends. Love. Lexi. P.S. I hope you like your blue pants. I added another smiley face at the end of the letter, my final emphasis on wanting to be friends. I considered closing with sincerely, but I figured love was a better, friendlier choice. I tucked the picture under my pillow that night, now anxious to see him rather than filled with dread of his reappearance. But like the last time, he did not return the next day, or the day after. The days stretched into weeks, and every morning I found the picture tucked under my pillow from the night before. It wasn't until Thanksgiving break that I saw him again. My eyes opened as the morning sun poked through the blinds of my bedroom. His body didn't look any different in the light. In fact, his black skin seemed darker, absorbing the sun's rays without giving anything back. His eyes seemed wider than before. If he had a mouth, I would have figured he was smiling. In his slender fingers was the picture I drew for him. Hello, Lexi, he said. Thank you for the picture. I do look good in blue pants. I wanted to smile, but, well, sleep paralysis. He flipped the picture over to the side with my letter. I will answer your questions the best I can. I do not have a name, not one you could ever pronounce, but I am happy for you to call me Mr. Brown Sticklegs. As for my age, I exist outside of the construct of time, therefore I am ageless. I do not go to school, nor do I know what school is. Why do I visit you? I visit to feed on the energy of your soul. My breath quickened as a mute groan exited my teeth. I wanted to run, wanted to get away from him, but I was pinned down, unable to move. He sensed my uneasiness and tried to calm me by patting my forehead. Let me explain. Have you been to the ocean? It appears vast, almost limitless, as you stare out into the blue water, with no visible land on the other side. In my mind, I was standing on a beach. I felt the salty ocean breeze against my face as I looked out over the massive body of water. The waves crashed at my feet. I felt the rush of water over them, followed by the trickle of sand and pebbles as the water drew back. Your soul is like an ocean, child. Vast, limitless, undefinable by words to your understanding. I take only a tiny sip, a single glass of water from a vast ocean. I am not one who could consume an entire ocean. Dark clouds formed over the water as I stared at the white-capped waves. The clouds unleashed a heavy downpour, turning the horizon gray as rain fell from the sky over the ocean. Just as the rain falls over the ocean, your soul can replenish itself by more than I could ever consume, not even in 1,000 of your years. Does that make you feel better? On the beach in my mind's vision, I nodded. In my bedroom, he nodded back at me. Good. As for your last question, why you cannot move, we are meeting at a point outside of your time where your world and mine touch. Your physical body cannot move here, but if you persist, you can learn to speak to me with your mind, and I will answer your questions in exchange for your drawings. You can draw pictures of whatever you like. I want to know more of your world. In my mind, I nodded again. This knowledge is a gift so we can understand one another more. I am not one who would hurt you. He pressed his fingertips to my eyelids again, closing them. In my mind's eye, I was still on the beach, but the sun was setting, and no stars were visible through the rain. I drifted back to sleep to the sound of falling rain. The next morning, I asked my parents for a sketchbook and colored pencils. They tried to hold me off until Christmas, but since I spent most of my afternoons and weekends drawing pictures up in my room, Dad let me open one of my gifts a week early. A Strathmore sketchbook with 100 pages, with a 50-pack of Crayola-colored pencils. I started by drawing the rest of my family: Mom, Dad, my little brother Tommy, our cat Libby, and even though he had died, our dog Pancakes. Next, I drew our house, then our car, then my school. I kept drawing anything I could think of: trees, birds, insects, until my sketchbook was full. I used my allowance to purchase more books so I could keep drawing. I honed my craft, redoing my earlier drawings in greater detail. My thoughts considered his wording. I am not one who could consume an entire ocean. I wanted to ask him if there were those who could, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to know such things. Mr. Brownstick Legs didn't return until my freshman year of high school. To him, it wasn't like any time had passed. I read up on lucid dreaming in the time between visits, so that when he returned, I would be better capable of talking to him. He held my book in his hands, flipping through my drawings, doting over the increased refinement of my drawing skills. I had filled a dozen sketch pads and upgraded from Crayola to Prismacolor Premier pencils for my drawings. His biggest surprise was when, after he complimented my drawings, I spoke to him. "Thank you," I said, seeing the words in my mind as I spoke them aloud. If he had a surprised expression, his eyes showed it. "You have been very busy, child," he said. "Do you have any questions you would like to ask?" I hesitated, but finally formed the words in my mind. "Are there creatures who can consume an entire ocean?" He didn't respond right away, which made me think I had not asked properly. As I asked him a second time, he put a finger to my lips as if to shush me. "There are those who can. They are known as the Dark Ones. They are capable of consuming entire souls, emptying them out, leaving them dry and barren. You should not fear them, but you should also not provoke them." His eyes curved downward, as if concerned or afraid. "What do they look like?" I asked. In my mind, my visions were filled with images of great, terrible creatures. Spiders taller than the Empire State Building on thin, spindly legs of shadow and smoke. Tentacled monsters in the seas lofting blue whales like they were toys, ripping them to shreds with their curved chitinous beaks. Great, ghastly flying creatures that knocked over orchards and forests with the beat of their leathery wings. "I showed you only because you asked," Mr. Brownstickleg said. "But it is best that we don't talk or think about them. Let them be." I nodded in my mind. He leaned forward and pressed his plate-like face to my head as if to kiss me on the forehead, which was odd since he didn't have a mouth. Then, as usual, he closed my eyes and I drifted back to sleep. My life took a downturn during the latter years of high school. My dad lost his job, and when the search for a new one dragged on, he turned to drinking to cope with his failure. He wasn't abusive, but he wasn't fun to be around either. In the months following, my parents would hush their arguing when I entered the room, greeting me with smiles as if nothing were wrong. That lasted until the day I came home from school to them fighting over a foreclosure notice from the bank. We moved out over a weekend from our home in the suburbs to an apartment on the other side of town. I internalized my feelings during that time. I withdrew from my friends and school activities besides the art club, the only one we could still afford. I saw my friends driving to school and hanging out while I rode the bus, too poor and too far out of the way to join in. My taste began to change as well. Out was the bubblegum pop of Katy Perry, K.E. Ha, and Taylor Swift. Instead, I listened to Pierce the Veil, Sleeping with Sirens, and Bring Me the Horizon. My clothes and makeup became darker, more black t-shirts and skirts with black eyeliner and black fingernail polish. Mom called it my goth phase, not that she understood. My drawings became darker too. I moved from colored pencils to charcoal, drawing skulls and gothic-looking cemeteries, as my passion for drawing animals and flowers waned. I also drew the Dark Ones, in great detail, exactly how I remembered them in my mind's eye. Mr. Brownsticklegs visited me again a month after we moved into the apartment. He looked more at home in my room of blacklight posters and death metal bands than he did in my previous room. His eyes were dim, not the vibrant red as they were before. He stared at me as I lay in bed, unable to move. He moved inches from my face as I heard his words in my mind. "Your soul tastes different now." He didn't speak of my drawings. I worried that he might, especially since I had been drawing the Dark Ones. Not only drawing them, but thinking about them, and what type of damage they could do if they were to wake. He seemed sad for me, although reading his expression was difficult with no face. He patted my forehead like before, but didn't close my eyes before leaving as he used to. My life continued its spiraling path like a bottle rocket with a broken stick. My parents didn't talk outside of short conversations about which bills to pay and which ones to ignore. Each night, Dad disappeared into a bottle while Mom disappeared online to chat with a male Facebook friend she knew from high school. The thing about rock bottom is that it's often a disguise for a trapdoor that drops you to an even lower depth than you thought possible. The first bottom came when my father died. Drove off the road into a gravel pit late at night with an empty bottle of bourbon in the passenger seat. I cried, but it felt hollow. I felt hollow. Even when Mom tried to hold me, I felt nothing inside. Not sadness, not guilt, not anything. I disappeared into my sketchbooks, drawing even darker, more disturbing images. Death, dismemberment, vividly accurate vivisections of the cute animals I used to enjoy drawing. My friends no longer talked to me, which was fine because I didn't want to talk to them anymore anyways. I found people to hang out with, not friends, but people who could get me access to moments of chemical-induced euphoria to forget about life for a while. Just like that, the trapdoor opened, dropping me to a new rock bottom of addiction. One thing I had that in common with my dad, but instead of falling into a bottle, I fell into a needle. I stole money from my mom's purse to feed my habits, not that she noticed. She was busy with her old Facebook friend who had moved from online acquaintance to nightly sleepover companion. When the time came to begin my senior year, I didn't bother going back. I kept drawing, filling entire sketchbooks with the dark images that reflected my bleak outlook on life. The dark ones were prevalent subjects during this period of my life. I drew them feasting on humanity, raking flesh from bone in their jagged teeth behind lips of smoke. I came home one night to find my mom and her new male friend in the middle of a fight. It was different from her fights with Dad, more violent, more physical. When he raised his hand at me for trying to intervene, I decided it was time to bolt. I left home, hitching rides with anyone with a set of wheels I could manage to put up with for short periods of time. My preference leaned toward those with access to the chemical release I craved. The more I could numb, the more I could escape. I found certain drug combinations had similar effects to sleep paralysis, where my mind's ability to control my body's action became severed. In those moments of numbed paralysis, I'd see Mr. Brown Sticklegs watching from afar as I dulled the pain. I saw what I perceived as the dark ones too, but they weren't hiding in the shadows like Mr. Brown Sticklegs did. They were the shadows. I called out to them as well, for in those moments I wanted nothing more than to be hollowed out and empty, a void so dark no pain could ever penetrate it. When they didn't answer, I called out to Mr. Brown Sticklegs, but he would vanish every time. Perhaps it was all just a drug-fueled hallucination. Overdosing was never my intention. I was pushing too much, trying to find the edge of the void after feeling so low, so very low, searching for that something extra to filter out the background noise. I took it too far, giving myself a near-lethal dose. At one moment, I was lying next to strangers on a stained mattress in an abandoned warehouse. Then came the initial rush of euphoric bliss. And then, nothing. Whoever I was traveling with at the time dumped me on the curb in front of the ER, making me someone else's problem. This was my rock bottom moment, although at the time, it felt more like free fall. I spent 3 weeks in a coma. I was aware of my surroundings and could hear the doctors and nurses as they checked my vitals and tended to my cleanliness and upkeep, but I couldn't move or speak. At the end of my 3rd week in the ICU on an incubator, I looked up to find Mr. Brown Sticklegs hovering over me, his round red eyes peering through the darkness. "What have you done to yourself, child?" His voice spoke inside my mind. In my mind, I was beside him, standing in the middle of a vast, salt-flat desert. The ground was cracked and dry in a hexagonal pattern that stretched in all directions. "This is your soul now. There is nothing left to drink." I heard my beep of my heart rate monitor back in my hospital room speed up as fear entered my mind. I called out to the dark ones. I said, "I asked for them to come. They emptied me out, emptied my soul." "No, my child, you did this. You have not replenished. You have only consumed. And now, nothing remains." I dropped to my knees in the middle of the salt as I felt a rumbling deep inside the hollow pit of my stomach. I leaned forward onto my arms, but they were no longer my arms. They were pitch black and empty. I could feel them, but when I looked at them, they were empty voids of smoke and shadow. I stood up on my legs, but they were no longer my legs. The darkness swirled up my torso and down my arms. The emptiness inside me consumed my entire body until only my head remained. What's happening to me? I heard a snap as my arms and legs split, forming 8 black, spindly thin legs. I collapsed onto them, unable to support myself. Mr. Brown's stick legs glided down in front of my face, his eyes inches from my own. As I told you, child, only the dark ones have the ability to consume an entire ocean of a soul. That is your fate. That is what you will become. Back in the room, my heart rate monitor crashed to a flat line. I felt the cold darkness swirl up my neck to my head as the void consumed me. I was aware of the nurses and doctors huddled around my body, prepping the crash cart, but all I felt was the cold consuming what was left of me. "Help me," I uttered. "Please." My physical body jolted from the electric paddles, but I felt nothing, only the cold darkness. A needle injected into my IV line as they recharged for another burst of electricity. Still, I felt nothing. Only cold, only darkness, only the vast emptiness of the void. Mr. Brownstick Legs tilted his head as he stared through his unblinking red eyes. He leaned forward, pressing his plate-like face to my forehead. I felt a vibration against my skin, followed by the tingling sensation of heat returning. The darkness receded back down my arms and legs. As he pulled back, the red in his eyes had diminished. A gift for the girl who gave me pants. A tear formed in my eye. It rolled down my cheek and fell onto the parched landscape below. Before I could say anything, an electronic jolt coursed through my body, pulling me away from the salt flat expanse and back to my hospital room. The sinus rhythm of my heart rate monitor returned to normal. I felt the cool gel of the defibrillator paddles against my chest. I remember squeezing the hand of one of the attending nurses, who smiled down at me. "Look who's awake." I cried, but it was different than before. I felt the pain I had long been avoiding, but I felt something else as well. I felt grateful, and I felt a sense of hope I hadn't known in a long time. It was a long road back from the darkness, but the thing about the road to recovery is that, like a road, it leads to a destination. After years of listless drifting towards the void, having a destination was an important first step in finding self-love. I reconnected with my mother, who was struggling with her own form of the darkness. We leaned on one another, talking and going to therapy as we worked through the issues that drove us apart. After my release from the hospital, I moved back home with her Facebook friend long gone. I got my GED and used my many sketchbooks as a portfolio to get an apprenticeship at a tattoo parlor. I've been clean for 4 years now, and it feels good to smile again. Granted, I still prefer Pierce the Veil to anything from Katy Perry's catalog, and my tattoos and jewelry have more skulls than fluffy bunnies, but that's all on the surface. I no longer crave the darkness to consume me. I often think about the vision with Mr. Brown's stick legs on the salt flats that night in the hospital. I had not seen him since that night, and I often wonder about the state of my soul since that day. Has it replenished, or is it still the dried-up barren wasteland that he took me to on the night? Last night, around 3 in the morning, I finally got my answer. I woke up with a heaviness on my chest, arms and legs. At first, I felt the grips of fear grabbing hold, much like the first time I experienced it. But then, in the dark corner of my room, I saw glowing red eyes staring back at me from the shadows. In spite of my sleep paralysis, couldn't help but smile when I heard his voice call out to me. "Child, your soul tastes much better now." Story: my wife forgot to delete her browser history. I can't believe what I found. 4:34 p.m. How to stop husband from cheating. I had only clicked on the history tab to delete the last thing I'd searched for when I noticed the entry. Hurriedly, I finished zipping up my fly and stared at it in bewilderment. Amy and I had been almost too careful. We had never so much as looked at one another in my wife's presence, let alone done anything that could have raised suspicion. There was no way she could have known what was going on, even if she had looked through my phone. With a heavy heart, I'd force myself to delete any incriminating photos Amy sent me after I was done with them, and we had a strict call-only policy. Amy was our latest hire, and aside from being great at her job, she excelled in garnering male attention. Everyone loved her. She was strikingly beautiful and uninhibited to the point where her energy felt almost carnal, sending all morals and restraints out the window. I tried to ignore her at first, even finding excuses to go home early. But eventually, her charming giggle got the better of me too. 4:37 p.m. How much does divorce cost? Droplets of sweat sprang out on my forehead. What? Was my wife planning to divorce me? But why? There was no way she knew about Amy and me. Was there someone else? Was she planning to accuse me of infidelity, all while going at it with some lover boy she'd met at her yoga class? 4:39 p.m. Why do humans feel emotions? I pursed my lips. If by some miracle my wife did know about the affair, I couldn't imagine the way she must have been feeling. I woke up late this morning and found a note on the kitchen table, saying that she didn't want to wake me and that she was out doing her Saturday errands. I almost felt compelled to call her and... oh. I flinched as a large drop of blood landed on the keyboard. What the hell? My first instinct was to look up at the ceiling. Nothing. A strong metallic smell made me come to my senses. I brushed my hand against my face. A bright red smudge sat on my palm. I stared at it, alarmed. I'd never gotten nosebleeds before, aside from the time I got hit in the face with a football in high school. My head raised, I scrambled to my feet and made a dash for the bathroom, my hands cupping my throbbing nose. Once I had managed to stop the bleeding and clean myself up, I returned to the computer. 4:44 p.m. Which part of the brain is responsible for love? This was an oddly specific search. I couldn't recall my wife ever being interested in science or biology. I checked the account logged into the browser, just in case. Perhaps this was someone else's history altogether? Or maybe we'd been hacked? Off number. Seemed like everything was in order. My wife's smiling face stared back at me from the login window. What was she doing searching for brain parts anyway? 4:49 p.m. What is excerebration? What? What was? Excerebration? Some kind of fancy divorce? I'd never heard of the term in my life. I didn't even hesitate before clicking it, eager to find out what my wife was planning for us. I wish I hadn't. As the results came up on the monitor, my stomach lurched and my gag reflex kicked in. The images were graphic enough for my hand to automatically gravitate towards the return button, but a short paragraph in bold caught my eye. An ancient procedure involving chiseling through the bone of the nose in order to scoop out the brain matter. My heart hammering in my chest, I clicked the back button and scanned the rest of the entries. 5:01 p.m. Can a person live without the hypothalamus? 5:05 p.m. Location of the hypothalamus. 5:11 p.m. How much temazepam is safe? My skin crawled as I read, but I couldn't look away. I was so immersed that I didn't even hear the front door bang. Honey, I'm home. I stared at the wall, too shocked to reply. What was I meant to say? How was I supposed to ask her about all this? Hello? She called again, her heels clacking towards me. Hey, I choked, throwing the box of tissues into the drawer. How was... Oh, good. She smiled as she appeared in the doorway. How are you? You had quite a lot to drink last night. I stammered. I did? She studied me, as though she wasn't sure whether I was joking or not. What's all this? I asked, gesturing to the computer screen. She joined me at the desk, frowning at the clammy wood surface. What? I pointed at the browsing history, my index finger shaking visibly in the air. Oh, she flushed, 2 pink spots appearing on her cheeks. Well, you did say we could try it, so I had to do a little research, you know. What? I said we could try. What? Oh, she waved her hand dismissively. The X say something. You probably know better. My blood ran cold. The excerebration. Karen, what did you do? But before she could say anything, a splash of blood landed on the carpet, and then another one, and another. Karen watched me, her skin growing pale. What? Suddenly, a small, fleshy lump escaped my nostril and rolled down the front of my shirt. We both stared at it in shocked silence. Then, my wife screamed, turning on her heel to flee the room, but I caught up to her, pinning her against the wall. Tell me what the fuck you did. She tried to fight me, writhing under my grip, but I held on tight. Blood was streaming into my mouth and down my chin, staining both of our clothes. How can you not remember? She screeched, trying to elbow me in the ribs. Don't you remember what you did? I stared at her panic-stricken face, trying my best to recall any memories from the previous night. No, what did I do? You came home after work and told me you were leaving me for Amy. She sobbed. You said you didn't want to love her, but you did. I stood there quietly, mulling it over, as more pulp splashed onto my stomach. Ew, we need to call you an ambulance, Karen shrieked, trying to pull away. What the fuck is that? Then what happened? I demanded, my heart practically leaping out of my chest. Tell me what you did. What the fuck, John? She screamed. We got drunk, okay? We got really wasted. And then you said you knew of a way to fix this, to fix us. You said there's something called hypothalamus in your brain, and if removed it would stop you from loving Amy. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. What the hell was she saying? Had she actually attempted to remove a part of my brain? And, wait, I whispered, who's Amy? Her expression made me feel foolish for not remembering. I knew that name, Amy. It sounded so familiar, and yet I couldn't for the life of me put my finger on it. What the fuck do you mean? She sounded bewildered. Amy, the girl you were cheating on me with for 6 months? I don't, I mouthed, releasing my wife and crumpling to the floor. I don't remember. Karen stared at me, her white blouse resembling a massacre, her mouth pressed into a thin line. What's happening to me? I whispered. She was silent for a moment, but I could see her eyes brimming with tears. Honey, what if I accidentally hit your hippocampus instead? What? That told me nothing. For fuck's sake, Karen, I'm not a fucking encyclopedia. Enlighten me. What the hell is a hippocampus? Nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. Honey, she sobbed, you're a doctor. It's the memory part of your brain. Mysteries are everywhere, and some may be closer than you think. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next mystery. See you in the next story.